Hello, wonderful people. It is Sarah, and we are here to talk about why do toxic people act like that. It's like our day 5 or something of our 5 days or 12 days of Christmas or 12 days of healing. And why do toxic people act like toxic people? Why do they do it? So, lots of theories on this. I just finished the book for, I think, the second or third time. 5 types of people who can ruin your life. It's a great book about toxic people, not about healing from toxic people. And there is a difference. Sometimes the healing process becomes just learning about toxic people instead of learning about a life after toxic people. So I really want to be clear. There's a huge difference in the two of those. Okay. So, but in the 5 types of people who can ruin your life, they talked about narcissists. They talked about sociopath. They talked about antisocial personality disorder. He talked about borderline personality disorder and people with paranoia disease. Yeah, but he was talking about high conflict personalities of either paranoia, antisocial, borderline personality, narcissism. And so within the context of all those, you have toxic people making up about 10% of our population. There's a lot of speculation that narcissism and toxic high conflict personalities are on the rise for several reasons. One, our children have been raised on a diet of steady media, which other generations were not as exposed to. And media brags on narcissism, right? They brag on people who are selfish and who do crazy things and horrible things. And we have murder mysteries and all these things because it's about excitement and it catches our attention. Toxic personalities and high conflict personalities catch our attention, which means they're in the media, and which means our kids are getting a lot of that. Even shows like The Bachelor, when, obviously we know that's not what healthy relationships look like, but when you watch it often enough, it starts to feel normal, which means toxic relationships feel normal. We also used to live in the same communities for most of our lives, which meant your character was very, very important. And now we move and we're always having to make first impressions. And so the first impression now means way more than it did 100 years ago. 100 years ago, nobody even cared about the first impression because you stayed in the town that your family grew up in and people knew who you were and your character from how you behaved in school. So people saw a lifetime rather than a snapshot, okay? But the art of the first impression, which toxic people are really good at, has become more and more important. There's a real argument about nature and nurture. Okay, are they born that way? Are they not born that way? There is more and more work being done about that it is more nature. It is more genetic. I do believe by the end of my lifetime, we're going to see a lot more genetic links. Have you ever seen the studies with twins who were separated at birth and they both end up there's twins separated at birth and one's in Montana and the other's in California and they both love ham sandwiches and happen to be mechanics, even though they've never met. So there's such a strong link to genetics. And there's also Marissa Pearce. I was watching one of her YouTube videos today and she talked about our character is really formed by the age of 5 years old, okay? And so think about all that has happened to us by the time we're 5. So there's definitely some type of balance of nature and nurture, but there's toxic people on the rise. There's more and more toxic people coming up in our lives and in our generations. And there's, toxic people, there's a genetic link, so don't despair if you've had kids with a toxic person, but there's absolutely some type of genetic link. When they've studied sociopath's brain, they talk about the empathy, the centers in the brain that hold empathy are actually missing. Okay, so they don't feel sad when they hurt people, right? They're very bored, and so they need some reprieve from their boredom. So they kill as a reprieve from their boredom, on that most extreme end. So that's one of the reasons toxic people act like that. But mainly they act like that because they can, because they get life satisfaction from control. They like getting away from the rules. They like seeing what they can get away with. Their love language is control, not connection. Okay, and so whether their brain is that way or it was something that happened with their mom, there's a sense of, if they're overindulged, if a child is catered to a lot, they are more likely to be narcissistic, or if they're ignored or neglected, they're also likely to be narcissistic. So there's just lots of interesting data and very controversial data. No matter who you talk to, it's almost always something different. Sometimes people say narcissism only makes up 1% of the population, which I actually did an article on that this week for Medium. But then, the guy who wrote 5 Types of Personalities Who Can Ruin Your Life talked about 10% of our population. And I am definitely going to swing on the side of 10%. Narcissists and toxic people do not typically go to therapy because they are missing that piece that is self-reflective. So they're not looking at their own behavior and thinking, oh, I behaved really badly, I shouldn't have done that, okay? They're always looking at you and pointing the finger. So if they're not self-reflective and they're not willing to do self-work, they're probably not in therapy, typical therapy, right? And therapy and therapists is where we typically diagnose these personalities and get our data about, is it 1% of the population? Is it 5% of the population? So I definitely think it's low. And I think as we enter the information age and we start sharing our stories and communicating, that there's going to be even more high conflict personality individuals and those types of people. So, but again, the most important thing is what they do, not why they do it. Because if you are good and kind and loving and sweet, and you are, well, he had a bad childhood, or well, she didn't mean it, or well, she's just having a bad day, that can really be a detrimental trap for you. That can be a very, very dangerous trap, because toxic people know how to use our goodness against us. And so whatever happened in their childhood, whatever sob story they give you, is not an excuse for bad behavior now. Someone mistreating them in the past is not a good reason for them to mistreat you now. It is not an excuse. At that point, they should be self-reflective and getting help. Not just saying, oh, baby, I know I need to change. Yeah, I'll go to therapy whenever they're in trouble, right? They all say the same thing. And if they're in trouble, they'll say they'll go to therapy. And then, it doesn't play to fruition. Or they go to therapy and blame you for everything and say, well, if she hadn't done this, then I wouldn't have done that. Very typical high conflict personality behavior. So it is not why they do it that is most important. It is what they do that is most important. And finding those patterns of control. Because if you only focus on one incident that happened, it's like you can't see the forest for all the trees. Well, he acted this way one way. Well, she said this one time. Well, that one time she turned that on me. Rather than the pattern of, hey, they always make me take the blame. Hey, whenever they get angry, they use gaslighting and manipulate me. Hey, whenever they realize they're in trouble, they get violent, okay? All those sorts of things are patterns. And the most important thing about a toxic person's behavior is their pattern, not their promise. And to find those patterns and to start connecting the dots and to kind of like raise up and see yourself as you're way up here, like looking down on your life, rather than looking at your life like, do this. Because if this is what you see and this is all you can see when you're within your toxic relationship, it's going to feel as you're going to feel helpless, and you're going to feel as if it may never get better, or, why is this happening? Why does this keep happening? What's going on? And you're going to live in that state of confusion and chaos that is so familiar to toxic relationships and toxic people, because they thrive in chaos, because chaos makes you easier to control. Okay? So, why do just to kind of recap it all, that was a lot of information. Why do toxic people act the way they do? There's some element of nature and nurture. There's some element of the way their brains are developed, as well as their personality traits. And then what happened within their nature, especially their first 5 years, their very, very early years, whether they were doted on and they could do no wrong, or whether they were neglected, that built on those personality types that were already there, okay? And I definitely believe as we go on throughout our lives that there will be more of a genetic link. And I think there's going to be more and more toxic people and high conflict personalities discovered, anywhere up to 10% of the population. I really think we're closer to there, and they are saying that younger generations are going to be more narcissistic than others. And it's not just about taking selfies on the phone. It's really an inability to cope and an inability to see themselves for who they are, and the inability to self-reflect. And if you've ever worried that you're the toxic person, if you have been self-aware and you have reflected on yourself and figured out who you are and figured out, okay, should I have done that? Should I not have done that? You're already in the clear. You're not perfect, but toxic people have completely, they push it on you, right? They don't have the ability to turn it back on themselves in a healthy way and question their own behavior and question their decision making. They just react or strategize to hurt you, right? Which is super dangerous. But again, it's not why they do what they do that's the most important. It's what they do that's the most important. Because I don't want your goodness and kindness and empathy used against you in a way that's like, oh, well, his dad left him and that's why he this. Or, well, she didn't ever have a healthy mother, so she acts this way. Okay, those are not excuses. Them being treated poorly is not an excuse for you to be treated poorly. That is not a get out of jail free card for the rest of their life. Just like you would never say, well, yeah, I've been, some of you, just straight abused, and it's like, well, I got abused, so I have a pass to act as ugly as I want to everyone else for the rest of my life. You would never think that. But that's what you're giving, that's the excuse you're giving them. Okay? And you're thinking, oh, my love will be enough. If I care about them and I love them in the big enough way, then that will be enough. And it's never enough, because it's not your problem to solve. It's their problem to solve. And no matter how many years you carry their boulder up the hill, it's their boulder to carry. And they have to learn to carry it. They have to develop those muscles themselves. And sadly, very, 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 very few toxic people get that help that they need. And there's just shockingly few, if any, real success stories within this niche, in this category, especially with, I love studying men who work with toxic men, and their success rate is not great, and they readily admit that, and they want to say that because their personalities are not easily changed, and they get a lot of benefit and perks from their selfishness, from their control. It's a lot of work to self-reflect and make changes and grow. And if they haven't had years of practice doing that, you've probably been doing that your whole life, right? You've thought, oh gosh, I probably should this, and maybe I should have done this differently. But if you've never had those thoughts, and all of a sudden someone expects you to take responsibility for your own actions, how dare they? That's a really scary place, and it's not a comfortable place. So very few toxic people go there. And then some of them actually have brain structures in place that prevent them from going there. They just react, or they lack those empathy pieces. Those empathy muscles are not strong and strengthened in the way that yours probably are. So I hope that helps. And I love doing these 12 days of healing with you guys. I know you guys have enjoyed them as well. So I will check you again tomorrow. Bye.